So as we've got through all these various aspects then, we've got the tax clearance in place, we've assessed and secured any finance that we may look to raise. Really now, at this point, we sort of tend to have a very high degree of confidence that the transaction can proceed. The real fundamental sort of building blocks are all in place. And that's why, in terms of the graphic now on the left, we're sort of seeing that this employee engagement is really starting to sort of ramp up. We may now have the confidence to start talking to the employees as a wider base around what our intentions are in terms of the succession of the business, and maybe starting to allude to employee ownership as a future ownership model for the business. So again, one of the benefits with EOTs is around the legal process. There's a lot less sort of back and forth because, again, we don't have this sort of natural buyer-seller tension and competing interests. That's not to say that there doesn't need to be a sort of balanced set of legal documentation around this. Absolutely there does. But typically, to help the transaction move forward swiftly, efficiently, one set of lawyers, on the basis that we now have an agreed transaction profile and valuation, one set of lawyers can look to prepare the documentation. They'll most likely be appointed by the employee ownership trust themselves. And then, if necessary, the vendors, the exiting shareholders, may look to just get a firm to give that a bit of an overview towards the end. But in our experience, that's not always necessary. So it can help to just sort of keep costs down a little bit. But I know there's a few lawyers on the line this morning, so I'll try not to sort of tread on too many toes in terms of this aspect of the process, but just touched on some of the various legal documents that are required. Again, typically, you don't tend to see a process of legal due diligence required, which often is the case in other forms of transaction, which in itself can be a particularly sort of time-consuming exercise. So for the exiting shareholders, again, there's a potential benefit there. So having gone through all these various aspects, we've ultimately arrived at the most exciting point of all, which is completion of the transaction. And this is where perhaps during that legal process and leading up to the day of completion, we're really starting to ramp up now the employee engagement and letting them know what is about to happen, and making sure that we land the ownership with the employees in just the right way. Carl, who'll be coming on to speak very shortly, obviously he'll be able to give some really useful insight, and I think it was particularly interesting how they approached this aspect of the transaction in terms of that communication with employees. I think from my perspective, I always think it's important to make sure that employees stay grounded. They need to carry on doing their day-to-day role as soon as this transaction goes through, and that's imperative that that happens. You know, they need to be realistic that this doesn't suddenly make everyone super rich, but hopefully they will be financially better off into the future. Obviously, that's one of the key interests of an employee ownership transaction. But at the same time, we don't want to be too downbeat about it all. This should be an exciting time, and we want to make sure that the employees really do understand the benefits that are going to come from this, and are excited about the future, which will hopefully give them some renewed sort of vigor and energy in terms of the functions that they do day to day for the business. I've just mentioned there that one thing that we've seen that seems to work particularly well is perhaps having some sort of company-wide event to announce it either at the day of completion or very shortly after, which can facilitate, you know, a forum for Q&A and making sure that the benefits of the transaction are delivered and communicated in just the right way, and everyone gets a common message around it.